Moving along to our last speaker, Brian Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is the Executive Director of TFO Canada. Brian has been with TFO Canada since 2004 and previously serving as Director of the Africa program, so very relevant. As well, Brian was a lecturer at the Institute of Public Administration and Management at the University of Sierra Leone. So we may get 3 more credits this afternoon for our MBA. So Brian, please.
Merci, Benoit. I used to do radio, and I feel like I sometimes felt on radio. Is anyone out there? So I have a question. And it's very hard to see, but I'll do my best here. How many in our audience are from Africa looking to sell products or services to Canadian businesses? Oh, I don't know. Well, I'll just assume that there's some hands up. And are any of you involved, perhaps government, chambers of commerce, or even as consultants, advising businesses on how to grow, do exports, basically trade support services? This time I saw a hand. This is good. And I know we have Canadians in this audience as well, and there may be some businesses here that are looking to source products from Africa, from African businesses. Is there anyone in that category? I'm not so convinced. I'll see a hand here. Well, those are the 3 audiences that our organization, the TFO Canada, aims to serve in the work that we do. And I'll get to our mandate in a moment, but really we share, I think, something common with, even if you didn't put your hand up, I think we share something common with every speaker and with every attendee at this week's conference, and that is how to use trade, whichever way it goes, or the investment that accompanies it or that creates it, as ultimately a tool for economic development. And that's economic development, whether it be on the Canadian side and Canadian jobs, or on the African side, and dealing in particularly with issues of poverty reduction and of equitable and sustainable growth. So that's what we do. And when we look at the world that we try to serve, which is small and medium-sized enterprises selling products into Canada from Africa, there are challenges, there are opportunities, and the good news is, for those of you that are in that space, there's also some services available, and that's what I will speak about today. So the challenge in front of us is, we saw a similar graph a moment ago. It is that pie chart of where trade is. And the correct figure, I had to check this, I'm an accountant, it's actually 1.7% of imports in last year came from the African continent. And somewhere, hello, hello. Not sure if someone can assist me in the back, have this move to the next slide or the next. I will carry on.
Let me
see if you can, maybe it got turned off. The reality is, with 1% market share or under 2%, it's hard to get mind share. It's hard to get mind share of Canadian businesses looking to source products. It's hard to get attention in terms of the investment to support that. And it's hard to see how to move to the next step. The other challenge that I think faces the, if we were to look at the next slide, is if the goal is to support SME growth and value-added processing activities, job-creating businesses, there we also see some challenges when we look at the flow of trade currently coming from the African continent to Canada. Primarily, it's in resource sector, some agricultural commodities, but relatively little in manufactured and processed foods, processed products where there would be value-added labor and job creation. So, some challenges. If we look specifically at a sector that does have significant labor and value-added, such as garment sector, garment manufacturing, that's where, no question, there's many opportunities to create employment through trade. But the story there is relatively modest today in terms of African trade to Canada. Certainly in terms of market share versus Asia, Latin America, even Europe and the US, it's a very, very modest story. But the potential is there, and this is where the opportunity exists. In fact, earlier today, and I guess it's still going on, we have a small trade mission from Ethiopia. We've got just a small number of exporters of leather goods and of garment products. Thank you. Meeting with Canadian buyers. And that's just one example of many that we have seen in the work we've done and the work I've been involved in with 10 years of TFO of opportunities that do exist. Indeed, if we look at some growth curves and we look at, for instance, exports just in that sector, to talk about it briefly, I guess we can move here a bit. If we look at, so the market share right now for just that sector is below 1% in Canada. In the US, though, it's double. Now, that still is a small number, but it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for a small or medium-sized business to enter the market here. And also, there's a growth curve taking place in the US, which we don't yet see in Canada. Canada and the US have very similar market characteristics in terms of consumer behavior and also buyer behavior and retail activity. Yes, it's 10 times the size, but even with that and taken into account, there is still much room in that sector and others for African businesses and products to move into Canada. So the good news is there's an institution that can help. And that is our humble and relatively modest organization. You heard, if you listened to Minister Sfaast's presentation this morning, or at lunchtime, speak about the many services to assist Canadian businesses going abroad, but particularly Canadian exporters and those taking investment abroad. But it's not part of the government, but it's certainly well supported by the Canadian government, an organization, TFO Canada, which has the mandate to help exporters from developing countries throughout Africa and other parts of the globe to enter the Canadian market and do business with Canadian businesses. So very briefly, we were created, in fact, by a cabinet order back in 1980. We're funded to this day by the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, and the development piece specifically, effectively using the Canadian market as a tool for sustainable economic growth. We work with those three client groups I asked about at the beginning in terms of exporters, particularly smaller and medium-sized businesses looking to sell products and services to Canadian businesses, trade support institutions, government and non-government, that are providing services to those businesses. And of course, we also work with Canadian importers, because without the other half of the trade equation, those business deals won't happen. We have three types of service. I will move through this quickly and then answer any questions, but we provide a robust set of trade information services. Certainly any new exporter to Canada, that's the first step, is they need to inform themselves about the opportunities in the market here, but also about the requirements, about the competitors, and how business is done. And we do that through a variety of means, primarily web-driven, and I have a couple of slides to just give you a bit of a sense as to how you could access some of those services or advise local businesses to do so when you return home. Advisory services, training activities, one-on-one consulting type services is another part of our work. We do, for instance, partnerships with several Canadian MBA schools where market entry studies are prepared for individual businesses on how to enter the Canadian market, which can then be used as roadmaps to actually move into the marketplace here. We do training programs, in some cases not just for businesses, but also for trade support organizations. If I look at some recent things that we've done for the South African government, for instance, training for their economic diplomats on both trade promotion and investment promotion. Advisory work we've done recently in Burkina Faso has been with shea butter, beurre de karité producers, on how they can form export consortiums and enter the market in a larger manner to meet the demands of large importers in North America. And of course, the question that every exporter asks is, put me in touch with buyers. And that is the activity going on downstairs. and buyer-seller activities, whether they be trade missions or reverse trade missions, when we bring Canadian buyers overseas. Even through our own website, we provide a contact service where a foreign exporter can put a supply offer, and we push those out to about 1,500 Canadian importers that we're in contact with. I should say at this point that although we work in a very large number of sectors, it is primarily in the food, fashion, clothing, footwear, and also in furnishings, home decor, furniture. I've mentioned the 3 client groups that we work with, and I've already spoken about a couple of past activities that we've done. We are modest in size and in funding. We cannot work everywhere. We have a trade information service, though, that is available to every country and exporter in the African continent. But where we are able to do a bit more work in terms of project activities is a group of 6 countries listed there, maybe 7. And we also have a new initiative that we're about to undertake beginning next year to specifically inform and advise producers, particularly in the garment sector, within least developed countries, within Africa particularly, about duty-free access that is available for their products into the Canadian market. So many of you will know about AGOA. Maybe you're part of businesses or organizations that have taken part in AGOA activities. Canada does have an AGOA, and we're finally able to do a bit of noise-making about it to inform suppliers about the opportunities and how to make use of this duty-free tool, which can certainly give a competitive advantage, particularly in clothing sector and fashion sectors. So I'll fly through these slides, but this is just a very quick flavor if you were to take a few minutes after this evening, or right now on your smartphones, to visit the TFO Canada site and the sort of information that you can provide there. It is, of course, all provided with funding from the Canadian government, so there's no cost to access these services. We do ask, though, that exporters register so we are able to understand who you are, the sectors and the regions of the world that you're coming from. And once into the site, then there's a number of information services that are available to you. We have a guide on exporting to Canada, but we also produce about 20 sector-specific publications, whether it's the garment sector in Canada, the fresh fruits and vegetable sector, dried fruits and nuts, and so on. And of course, there's news on our site. There's really a lot there. It certainly is a good 3 to 10-hour investment of acquiring information that a typical exporter would take over successive visits to really begin to build the market intelligence they need to enter the market. We also provide a connection to a tool provided by the Canadian government that gives you access to the names of all the importers for different sectors. Very useful tool when you're trying to actually make contact with buyers. We produce quarterly newsletters as well that could be useful. So that is a bit about TFO Canada. I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions. Je peux aussi répondre à vos questions en français si vous préférez. Merci. Thank you.